Hello everybody. Many of you have asked, since we started doing our video series where we're milling wood to extend our barn, many of you have asked, hey Troy, what about your barn? Can you detail that? We're not 100% sure what you got going on there. And I realized after those questions started coming in, I really haven't done a lot of discussion of the barn. We started on it actually before we started our YouTube channel, so I really didn't cover it. So in this video, I want to jump in and just kind of explain how we build our barn by hand with no debt and really not a lot of expense. So let's get into that. So it's kind of tough to see our barn and actually what we've got going on, I realize, from the camera angles, because the cameras are always down on the ground, and to really get a good idea of the barn you need to maybe see it from an elevated position. But our barn, of course, is primarily made out of wood that we've milled and has a metal roof. So those are the two primary materials, the wood for the posts and the siding, of course, all the structural elements, and of course the metal roofing. So maybe a little easier to look at the barn from this angle here up in the pig pasture. So there are features and parameters that really determined the shape and size of the barn. As you can see, in the front of the barn is my workshop. And if you go back to some of our first videos, that workshop is a 24 by 32, 24 feet wide, 32 feet long, concrete pad, single-story open frame structure that we built, that we actually lived in for several years while we're building the main house up on the hill. Well, this is the lowest elevation part of our property. This is what I call the middle of the valley, near the front of the property. And we only have X amount of flat land, of course, in West Virginia, so we wanted to build a barn that was still close to the house, so we wouldn't be driving or walking, miles to get to a barn on the property. So we wanted to have it close to the house, and then logically it made sense to just add it to the back of the workshop. So the width of the barn was determined by the wood shop. The wood shop's 24 feet wide, so that's what I did with the barn. I made a 24-foot wide barn. Well, one of the features I knew I wanted a loft. I didn't just want to do a regular peaked roof to match the peak of the workshop. I wanted to go up a little higher. Well, I didn't want to necessarily do a full second story either. I wanted just a simple loft. I don't have animals where I put up a lot of hay. I really don't have any animals that need hay at this point. So I knew I didn't have to have a big hay storage. But this loft could actually handle, some square bales. You could probably get, 75 to 100 in there, depending on how tight you packed them in. But that's the kind of the design I wanted, was basically a 1.5 story barn. It's a little embarrassing to actually shoot the inside of the barn right now because it's such a mess. So obviously we're working on our extension. It's transitioning between our warm months and our cold months. So I've got everything moved around. There's things that need to get put in the barn. There's things that need to be taken out of the barn. I obviously collect barrels because I think I'm always going to have need for it. So I have barrels everywhere, it seems, and scrap wood, doors, whatever. That's the problem with the barn. It always collects stuff. But what we did, we defined the barn as 24 feet wide. And that's where I started wanting to lay it out. Well, knowing that I wanted a half-size loft in the middle, I needed support structures underneath and, of course, support beams on the outside. So really what I did was just basically cordoned off 3 8 by 10 sections. And if you imagine just laying out 3 8 by 10 rectangles and then doing it again, that's what I have. And I call those, you can call them corrals, you can call them stalls or whatever. I have 6 of those originally, and then I've come back and put stall walls in for the pigs, or I've put a floor in to store some things, or left it open so I can pull my tractor in here. But I have, I don't know if the camera's picking up on this, but I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 4 by 6 pine posts that we milled on the sawmill. Here's one right against the workshop, so these are connected to the workshop. And of course we milled them. These are pine trees that came off of the property. At the time we were using my brother's mill, so we'd take it over to his place and I'd mill those timbers out. So since I was using 4 by 6 milled pine, not treated, no treatments on it, whatever, I did not want to stick those straight in the ground. Now there's all kinds of options you can do. I know guys that take the black mammy, the rubberized undercoating, and coat it and stick stick their beams in the ground. Or they could go ahead and use treated timber, but I didn't want to do that. Again, trying to save money. If you start adding up, 12-foot long 4 by 6s treated, and you need 12 of them, or eventually 16 as we extend the barn, then that can obviously add up pretty quickly. Well, we milled our boards here. So with this, of course, you don't have the protection you have with the treated timber. But what we did is we decided to build little concrete piers for each post. And these concrete piers are square, and of course they are proud of the surface of the ground. So they stick up higher than the ground, and as the concrete cured, we put these small brackets in that a 4x6 post would sit in, and I could screw them in place. So the reason for doing that, of course, it kept the pine from being in contact with the ground, got it high enough off the ground to keep it dry, so I didn't have to deal with treated timber there. Of course, you can go to box stores and buy those cardboard tubes that you can stick down in the ground, and of course fill those full of concrete, and that makes that pretty easy. But those suckers are actually kind of expensive when you look at it, and you think how many I'd need here. That adds up pretty quickly as well. And again, we're trying to save as much money as possible. So what I did instead is I dug out a square hole, as square as possible, down below the frost line, which here in West Virginia the frost line is 18 inches, or at least it was 20-some years ago. It's probably gotten a little higher since then, since we've had not as hard winters. But dug down 18 inches, and then I just took a simple form, just simply taking boards, 2x6s, 2x8s, whatever I wanted to do, and just formed out the top of that square above the ground. So when I poured that hole full of concrete, of course, fill up the hole and then fill up the form. Smooth it off, tap it all down, get it nice and sexy looking there. Take my bracket that has these long prongs that stick down in the concrete, kind of shake them down in there, and I've got an attachment point. So once that cured and set up, then I could set my post here. And that's what this post is setting on. And it's one of those deals where when you go to set your bracket for your post, that's when I have my mason string all strung, everything all plumbed and square the best I could possibly do. So when you set those brackets in, you're setting it in where your post can go. But the neat thing about these brackets is you've actually got some leeway left or right. So in this situation, if I was off this way, I could move this post maybe an inch or so this way or an inch or so that way, still be on my concrete pier, and still fit in my bracket. So that gave me some slop there in case I was off, which my work, I'm off all the time. So that was a way to keep from using treated wood. And of course, now I've come back because of the carpenter bees and used motor oil, and you can see a video about that here. But that really allowed me to use the wood off the property, no harsh chemical treatments, granted motor oil, a little bit harsh, but not have that treated lumber expense, not have the concrete tube expense, mixing all my own quickcrete by hand or concrete by hand with my concrete mixer. So not a huge expense there, and that allowed me to get all my load-bearing posts in place. But when it came time to actually put the loft in place and put the ceiling rafters in place, I started with notching my 4x6 posts. Actually, I notched them before I put them up. It makes it a lot easier. I notched them because I wanted my 2x material, my floor joist of the loft, to be able to rest on this notch of the post instead of just being nailed to the side. That gave it a lot more strength, of course. If I would decide to put hay or something heavy in there, it could bear that load more. Now again, if I was going something real crazy, I'd do more than 2x8s, go 2x10s, 2x12s, but that's another reason why I went with the shorter spans. The 8-foot, 10-foot, I can get away with the thinner or the narrower 2x material. So the notches really helped. Everything ties into a notch and is nailed as well. And then that allowed me to put the flooring down for the loft. Now, this first round I put OSB down for flooring, and I'm not going to do that anymore. Again, if you watched one of the videos just from last week, you saw where we were putting down our poplar that we had milled for flooring, and that's what I'm going to stick with. A, because of the expense, I saved money on that. B, water still kind of blowing in, the moisture in the barn makes that OSB swell over time, and I just hate messing with it. 4x8 sheet, it's more glue, it's more formaldehyde than it is anything, so it's a pain in the butt to work with, and I'd rather just use wood straight off the property. We got wood we got to mill anyway, so let's go ahead and use it. Well, so for the loft, I just put up what I would consider a knee wall or a half wall. It's actually more than that. It's about a right at a 6-foot studded wall. Again, all milled from lumber here. A couple scrap 2x4s that we had. And that allowed me to come back and put a nailer in and put my my rafters in for, again, just for the roof line of the main part of the barn. Simple peak roof on top of the loft allowed us to get that weathered in. and utilized, did rafters, obviously not building trusses or anything like that, just utilizing rafters and putting an A-brace in it, of course, to keep the rafters from pushing down. They just sit pretty easily on top of that knee wall. So as we go to extend this loft portion, obviously I'm standing on the new floor part of the loft extension. Then of course we'll take these siding boards up. These were just kind of put up temporarily. In fact, it's not even completely nailed, put up temporarily to keep the weather. Our storms come down the valley, so they would always blow in this way. So I wanted to try to keep as much rain from coming in as possible. And at one time had a tarp hanging here, but obviously we took that down as we came in and out of that. So the loft will be extended, and this is where we'll stop. We'll not extend the loft any further than this. In fact, the barn won't extend any further. Anything we go further back on may just be a smaller lean-to or shelter for the mill, or some other farrowing options there for the pigs. Now we haven't finished closing in the existing loft sides. That's where we're continuing the board and batten style of siding. And again, that's just something we mill out of 7-inch wide poplar. I'm doing most of that in poplar. I don't think I'm using any pine on the siding. And once we get that closed in, then it'll be weathered in a little bit. The battens, of course, close out the gaps and take care of the wood shrinking, kind of hides all that shrinkage there. So we've got a portion of the left side done. The right side still needs to be closed in. So when all's said and done, we actually should have a 24 by 32 barn. So it actually doubles the size of my workshop. That was kind of the plan. We had two 8 by 10s, and this extension is now 12, so that adds up, if I do my math right, yeah, that's 32 feet. So the plan will be to have roughly a 24 by 32 barn. So what are our expenses we have in this? Well, you could say, well, all we have really is the nails that we bought, maybe a couple sheets of OSB, which we're not doing that anymore, and the metal roofing. And that would be accurate. That's really the only out-of-pocket expense we have for the barn, but of course, there has to be a sawmill involved in this to get this wood. So if you're looking to build a barn, say, I want to build it cheap, how did Troy at Red Tool House do it? Well, they mill their own lumber. Of course, we had to have a sawmill. So we had my brother's mill when we first started. Now we have our own mill to finish this out. So of course, there's the mill expense. So if you take the $5 grand in a mill, and then put that on your barn expense, then of course that's going to be your total out of pocket. Now granted, the mill is going to allow you to do more stuff beyond just the barn, but it is an expense you have to incur. But what's interesting is the metal roofing I have, so both sides and the top for what that'd be roughly 2/3 of the barn, I have about $650 in it. We have a lot of metal roofing companies around here, so they get pretty competitive. So $650 in that. Again, the mill milled all the wood. The trees were right behind me on the property, drug them down. We milled them, or took them to my brother's house to mill them. So a little bit of expense there. And of course, just the hardware, the nails, the brackets. Surprisingly, those brackets for the concrete, I think they're like $12 a piece. So that's kind of added up pretty quickly. But really not a lot of out of pocket. And the beauty of this, and I use the term beauty maybe in air quotes because it looks like a herd of goats right now, but the beauty of this is, build it as I have the opportunity. So other than the single outlay of cash for the roof, really kind of just worked on it when we can. The time to get the lumber milled, the time to build it, the time to put the pieces in place. So really not a lot of out-of-pocket cash. So while we've got a ways to go on completing our barn, it is serving a purpose right now. It does have function. Again, in the early spring, we're farrowing pigs inside our stall here. So we're getting them in a warm, dry place. Obviously, you can see I collect a lot of junk and store it in the barn. Hopefully we can improve on that as we get more storage taken care of and get some other things in place. So even though it looks like a pile of sticks, it does have value to it right now. We are able to use it. And also the way I built it, if we would discover that we have some load-bearing issues, if we need to shore up some things more, then of course the style in which I built it, I could always come back and add more supports. For this, take example, this 12-foot extension here, if I feel that those boards aren't strong enough to hold what I want to put in the loft, as I'm thinking about air drying more of our wood, putting that up there and think, okay, that needs to be a little bit more secure, then I can of course come in and put additional bracing in. That's the beauty of a pole barn style barn, and this is what I would consider this to be a pole barn, is the posts bear the load, and then of course we can come back and add to it if we need to. So one dilemma I have that I haven't quite figured out, and I would love to get your all's input, get your suggestions, because it may seem obvious to some of you, and to me I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it, is how to close this side in. Where I'm standing, of course, is where our vehicle traffic comes in. Right where I'm standing is where we back the trailer up to load the pigs through the corral. All the vehicles come this way. So I've got what I consider, if you look at it as bays, again with these 3 areas here, I've got 3 bays. So bay 1, bay 2, and bay 3, which is the longer, it's the 12-foot long, and has our corral in it right now, is if I was to close all this in to get it more weathered in for you know, more air, not airtight, a more weatherproof barn, do I put solid wall here and just a door here, or vice versa, door, solid wall, sliding door, so I can slide this door over, not have to worry about swinging out. Do I close all of it up? Well, I wouldn't close all of it up. So I'm going back and forth on that. Right now I like the idea of having doors at least here and here, so they would need to be swinging doors. So it'd be 2 doors that swing open for each bay. Well, of course, when those are swinging, you got the hinges, you got the engineering that goes along with that. You'll obviously have to put some work into that. But that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. I like the sliding barn door, but I don't like the idea of covering up both of my doors. Yeah, in that situation, have one covered up while you're using the other, or vice versa. And I could leave it wide open, but I do like the idea of having it sealed up a little bit better, especially if we start having farrowings earlier in the winter instead of waiting until spring. So our plan is to continue to take you all along with us on our barn build as we work on it, as we add more material to it. Of course, the next step is to finish our floor, add our knee wall, and get our loft built so we can get it weathered in. I'd love to have this extension weathered in this winter so we can get that drying out, and then when drier weather hits, we can start getting that spring taken care of and some other things. But that's the plan. Well, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, by all means leave them below. We'll talk about them. We can detail this however you like. Again, it's really not any crazy engineering. It's very basic, very simple. Tools we use to lay it out were very basic. Some levels, some strings, and some mason strings, and just using some basic math there, we were able to get our area all gridded out. And it's fairly square. I'm not going to lie and say it's a perfectly square building. It runs out a little bit in some places, but again, that's the beauty of milling your own wood. If something runs out a little bit, you just use a longer board.